Welcome to Fierce Female Filmmakers, a production of Artemisia's Daughters, a non-profit organisation that aims to inspire, educate, empower and employ women of all ages and backgrounds in the film and TV industry. Hello and welcome to Holly Tarquini, who is my guest today on Fierce Female Filmmakers. She's not a filmmaker, but she's a champion and a cheerleader of female filmmakers, and I definitely want to talk to her today. Holly, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Tell me a little bit about Bath Festival and how that came about and just the beginnings of everything. I'm always interested in why people are inspired and drawn to film and all that goes with it.
Okay, it's a big question, so I'm going to try and tell you as succinctly as I can. So Bath Film Festival started 31 years ago. It was started by a man called Chris Baker, and he ran a film society group in Bath where they put on some films over a weekend and they had some money left over. And because they had some money left over, they thought, obviously, what Bath really wants is a film festival. So he started the film festival. Meanwhile, at that same time, I was in London producing, directing documentaries. So I worked in television, not in film, and in documentary, not in drama. So although it sounds as though it's quite a similar world, as you will know, it's a completely different reality. And actually, I burnt out. I moved to India briefly and set up a guest house with my husband. And then we moved back when I was pregnant with my first daughter. And we moved to Bath. And I thought that my whole television career was over because I wanted to see my baby. And the way that I'd been working in television was 24/7. Happily, I'd been working 24/7. And I had no idea at the time that what I was doing was basically doing my older self out of a job, because obviously if you can pay quite little to a 25-year-old that's going to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and some days I was literally working 24 hours, why would you employ the 35-year-old who's got a child and wants to go home and see them every so often? So we moved from India to Bath, and I kind of fell across Bath Film Festival. And there was one paid role at Bath Film Festival at the time, which was a part-time job, and it was the coordinator. And I somehow managed to persuade the organisation to give me the job and have been there for the last 10 years, expanding the organisation, which is now called FilmBath, as opposed to Bath Film Festival. And one of the reasons it's called FilmBath is because it encompasses many things. So the festival in November is our main activity, but we also have awards which run through the year, and the F rating, which is a feminist film rating.
F rating? Tell me a bit about that.
So back in 2014, there were two news stories which came through the Bath Film Festival office. The first of which was that, as with every other year, fewer than 5 of the top 100 films had been directed by women. And that obviously means that 95% of the films that people most watch are directed by men, but that's not just the 49% of all men. That is white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, middle-class, middle-aged American men, which is an incredibly narrow viewfinder through which to see the world and to have what I think are arguably our most influential stories. So that was the first news story. And the second one was that Elaine Teyer, who ran 3 cinemas in Stockholm, had decided to highlight all the films in her cinemas which passed the Bechdel test. And you will know that the Bechdel test is not a test, it's a cartoon. And it wasn't, so it's a cartoon drawn by Alison Bechdel, but about a friend of hers. So she keeps saying, don't even call it the Bechdel test, it wasn't my idea. But it shows 2 women walking down the street saying, one of them says, do you want to see a movie? And the other one says, I've got 3 criteria for a film. They have to show 2 women on screen who have a conversation with each other about something other than a man. And the vast majority of films in 2014 failed the Bechdel test. And so my colleague Elspeth, who was on the programming team at Bath Film Festival, said, that's a brilliant idea. Why don't we do that? Why don't we highlight all the films in our program which passed the Bechdel test? And I thought, that's genius, and it's really fun, and it gets people talking about what's happening on screen. But what I really care about is who's telling the story, because the person telling the story brings their life experience to the script and to the filmmaking. And so I came up with the F rating, which is applied to all films which are written and or directed by women. If the film is written by a woman and directed by a woman and stars significant women in their own right, then it has a triple F rating, which is kind of like our gold standard. And we thought, or I thought in 2014, that we might get some local press in Bath about having this new rating that we were putting on our festival, and none of the local press said anything. But the world's press went completely bananas over the whole idea, and we got covered in all the nationals in the UK, but also in America, in China, in Italy. I was on Swedish radio. It was amazing. And this, of course, was before Me Too and Time's Up. So it was just really of its moment. And so since then, I've invited any other cinema, film festival, or film exhibitor to use the F rating in their program, because those of us that proactively want to watch women's films or films directed by women and written by women, and that includes trans women, find it quite hard to find those films, because frequently they have a lot less spent on them to promote them. And so they don't come across your social feed in the way that all the big budget films do. And in fact, there's obviously and unsurprisingly a direct correlation between how much you spend on marketing and how much your film brings in income and how many screens it gets screened in. So it's really important because it helps people to find those films. And then in 2017, IMDb added it as a tag word to over 25,000 titles. So you can now type in F-rated on an IMDb and you get 25. And the brilliance of that is that often female directors and writers are pigeonholed into rom-coms or into the kind of, I don't know, fluffy teen stuff. And obviously women want to tell as broad a multitude of stories as men want to tell, and they have done, and all those films have been made. They exist in every genre, in every way, and some of them are rubbish, but actually it is very difficult to be a mediocre woman in film. It's quite easy to be a mediocre man. And so the women that have had feature films directed, if they've directed them or if they've written them, they tend to be brilliant.
What a lovely encapsulation of what you do. And I mean, I'm sitting here dying to interrupt you and go, oh yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. But I'm also just, it's a manifesto. It's a manifesto to what, what we're just trying to, I am just trying to shine a light on exactly what you're saying. And, sometimes it does feel like you're shouting in the dark, because the light gets switched on because you wrote something, raised all the money. Of course, you produced it, because nobody cares about your project as much as you do. And then you have to sell it. And conversations I've had, even with sales and distribution, they're still way behind that curve you're talking about.
Yeah.
And even going back to that idea of, oh, well, women could direct rom-coms and sort of soft, let's call them soft subjects. And I wrote an underwater action sequence in my film, and it was very expensive. And we had to hire a big tank in Essex with, the blokiest bloke atmosphere you could imagine, with divers and underwater grips. There's electricity and lights in the water, so they had to be very skilled at their job. And then there was me running the whole thing, and I knew I was in this unique situation, but I was also very clear about my story, and I had drawn little hand-drawn storyboards and so forth. And it took us a week, and the female stunt performer said to me on the last day, she said, you have to know, because they will never tell you to your face, that this week is the first time the director's actually been in the room, in the tank. Usually they're out in Video Village doing everything through the first AD. And your story, and they are giving you props, but they'd never say to your face, because they couldn't imagine, maybe, or they'd never experienced a woman directing it's a fight underwater. I didn't know it was going to be. I just wrote it. I didn't think about the logistics at the time. But that's an example of constantly doing everything you possibly can do to put yourself in a position where you can just make a film, and people are still scratching their chins and sucking their teeth. Like you said, once you've gone through all of that and you have this finished baby ready to be presented to the world, you're still put up against, well, we're really doing YA stories right now. And
I'm really interested that you said that you had a really blokey set because you really needed the skill. And I would like to ask you, how much time did you put in trying to find women to do those jobs?
I did have a female DP, and then she got offered a big television series that she couldn't turn down. And another male DP I had worked with really lobbied for the job. And I was also in a position where I was paying so little that I didn't want anybody to be there with a gun at their head. You had to want to be part of this small production. So there was that. And I will tell you, there are about a half a dozen 9 underwater cameramen in the country, and as far as safety divers, they're all men. I was never said, oh, and you'd love Cynthia, she'll come along, she'll be great. There just aren't any. So another goal of Artemisia's Daughters is that I want young women listening to us talking, just go, oh, there is a job that I can make a living doing a job doing that. I love diving and so forth. I could get qualified as a safety diver at Pinewood Studio. These guys, I'm telling you, these guys make £650 a day.
Whoa.
And everybody else we could negotiate down because we were a tiny film. None of them, they have no reason to negotiate their fee. And they work all the time all over the world because it's such a specialized job. And there's no way that a woman couldn't do that job.
No, it's really interesting, isn't it?
No, it doesn't need a physical thing. It just needs the skill and the training, but nobody's inviting them to have a go.
Well, also, it's what interests me a lot is the ways in which women themselves, the ways we vote ourselves out of situations. I think often because of cultural conditioning. So the fact that I used to be a producer director, I really miss it. I loved it. I absolutely adored it. And I could see no way of doing it and having children. And my husband, had he been in the same situation, wouldn't have seen that as his situation. And it was partly because I had breasts and I was feeding them, and it was the actual physicality of giving birth and breastfeeding a baby, which also we don't seem to talk about enough, that actually physically there is one person that can make the food if they can and deliver it to the child and the other person can't. But also that it's an industry where almost as soon as you step out, that's it, you're dead and you're gone, and you're on to the next phase.
But I've seen it with my girlfriends, wanting to go back into any job after their children are old enough to be, left, or, that you can do. And the film industry is a 10, 12-hour job a day.
Exactly.
I still don't know how makeup and wardrobe, who are mostly women, how they do that, and how they have, something has to be sacrificed. It's either your career or your family.
Well, and makeup and costume. I found out recently that although it's predominantly women in those roles, that when men are in those roles, they get paid more than the women.
What?
But
why?
No, yeah, I know.
Why?
Because they're much, much better. And they're much more valuable.
And they don't have to pay for childcare, so they've now got extra beer money.
Or maybe they have to pay for so much childcare from so many different areas that it's just too expensive and they have to be paid more. But also, so Nora Ephron ran a set where you could get home and cook dinner.
I didn't know that.
And she was doing that in the 80s.
Yes.
And she was saying, you don't have to run a set that has to be there 24 hours and 7 days a week. You can plan it, and you can plan it so that people who have caring responsibilities can get on with those caring responsibilities. So I don't know if you've heard of, do you know Raising Films?
No.
So Raising Films is a fantastic organisation. So Hope Dickinson Leach, who's a British director, she was part of setting it up. And it was a group of women who recognised that all of these issues go on, and that the majority of caregivers in the industry are women, and that often those caregiving roles mean that you simply can't work on a set when a set is set up the way that they historically have been, that it's a way of excluding women subtly, kind of thing. And so Raising Films looks into the kind of nitty-gritty of the evidence of what happens on sets that means that caregivers can't work on them, but also looks for the solutions that there could be, and simple solutions like having one of your vans as a crash and you've got somebody there, and so if people have got very small kids, they can be taken care of on set. And that you put the baby into the budget, and that places like the BFI, where you've got public funding, which I know in America doesn't exist, but if you've got public funding in Europe, that absolutely childcare is one of the elements that you can apply for money to fund.
I know my co-founder Carla found a little film on YouTube, something like exactly what you're talking about, which was childcare alongside a DP, and then a cut of her in an outside tent, and she's breastfeeding, and then twins, and then she comes back, and now essentially a perfect world where women are working in film and have support in looking after their children. And I watched it, and now I don't have children, but I watched it and I just went, it still looks really, really hard work. You can't discount the physical, like you were talking about, the physical aspect, the long hours, the just knuckle dragging tiredness, which you get anyway from working 12 hours a day when your creative brain is going at 100 miles an hour. I think we all get used to situations. Women especially are incredibly adaptable. I know at my age I found out just how adaptable I can be, and that kind of collaboration, that kind of support, I think it's we can't imagine how if we'd had that when Nora Ephron was doing that, if that had become a thing. Gosh, I miss her. I miss her writing and her films.
Yeah.
And then those women get taken from us too soon, and now it's up to us, the new ones coming down the pike that need to be aware of that. But you asked me, how much effort did I put into finding women to fill the roles that on my crew, and it was hard to find. My first AD, I would have loved to have been a woman I worked with on my first short film, but she was directing her first feature film. So again, when you've got only 2 or 3 deep of each department who are a woman, and the default is a guy who's like, I'll do it, or I've got 20 years experience, and I want to be with somebody who has 20 years experience on my first film. It's we've got to untangle that and keep the flow of young women, or not young women, not just young women, but women coming into the industry. And that's another thing I have to keep slotting in or remembering to say, is that there are a lot of women whose children are up and grown, who have all these skills, or to learn new skills, and that's what we're trying to encourage here, is the education, listening to women such as yourself who've been through it, both sides of having children and still finding a place for yourself in the film industry, and having a job doing it. It's so exciting, but it's still not going quite fast enough for me.
Well, and also what you've said is exactly one of the issues, is that sheer weight of numbers, that in order to kind of get to the top of that pyramid where you are directing one of the top 100 films, you have to have the mass of that gender coming up through being a runner, being an AD, being a DOP, being an editor, so that they have the kind of experience to then be a director. And if you don't have enough women in the whole mix, if you've only got them in the art department or in costume and makeup, then there aren't going to be the numbers so that you can employ them as the DOP, as the editor, as the composer, as the AD. And so the women who have dedicated themselves to having either gender balanced or predominantly female crews, it is much harder work to find all those talented women. And that's despite the fact that the same, when they graduate from film school, it's 50% male, 50% female.
Yes, because something's not encouraging them to continue. And you have to have a pretty thick skin as well. I mean, I know my confidence came from 30 years as an actress in film and television and theater. So I knew that. I was solid with that. But I constantly was coming up against my lack of experience, which was, oh, yeah, it looks great. I love it. Let's move on, because I was just desperate to make the day. But I had more experienced male crew members saying, no, you'll want a bit of coverage here. You'll want to do this. And I was super appreciative of that. But sometimes I didn't want any more coverage. Sometimes I wanted to move on. And it just became increasingly difficult not to take it personally when my crew was kind of it felt like they weren't on my side. And of course, I don't know, because I haven't experienced it yet. But I think if it had been more female inclined, we'd have had more conversations about it. And, I see that. I see that in my partnership where, he's like, one conversation done, decided on. And I'm like, well, no, wait a minute. There's some nuance here. And it's a sort of, it's a parallel. The way men and women react with one another, I think, in life is really no different on a film set, because a film set is a microcosm of the world in which you're living for this finite period of time, which has a ticking time bomb clock hanging over it all the time. And the men, God love them, and I wish I was more like this, the men are able to make the decision, boom, let's do it. And I always want to, even when I know what the net result is, I'd like to know what my options are, or, not just, no, it's too dangerous, we can't do that. Okay, well, what can we do then?
Yeah, but you see, with my husband and I, we're the reverse of that. So I'm absolutely, this is the answer, this is what we're going to do, this is the result, let's go do it. And he is, hold on, there might be 6 other options that we could explore. Let's explore the 6 other options. So I don't think any of these things are gendered. And I think the vast majority of things which are done by the stories that we tell. And so by telling repeated stories on screen, in the stories that influence us on television, in films, of this is what women are like, this is what men are like, then we consume and absorb those beliefs. And I do think they're beliefs. So if you ask a neurologist about brain difference, they say sex is the least interesting part of brain difference that there is. It's just, it doesn't exist in the way that, frankly, a patriarchal system has decided it exists, smothered that on top of us all in order to disadvantage women. And I don't buy it. I don't think women are less confident. On the contrary, I think the challenges that women overcome show time and again that women are more confident. We are stronger in every way other than being able to lift weights. We can swim further, we can walk further, we can survive better in cold environments, in hot environments. We die less frequently when we're babies, we don't get diseases so badly. The problem with that is our immune systems are so good that we get more autoimmune disorders because our immune systems are so powerful. We are the powerful surviving ones because we have to be. If there's any genetic difference, that is it. But as far as confidence, being able to tell people what to do, being able to command things, that's something which has been proactively taken away from us by the stories that are told on screen. And if we can change those stories, we change that whole narrative.
Of course, I think I know the answer to this, but if all that you've just said is true, and I love it, I want to believe it, I do believe it, why are we only doing something about it now. What has changed? What has changed in society or in our lives? It wasn't Harvey Weinstein. I cannot believe it was just that.
No, but we've only just kind of had feminism. We've only just had a massive revolution. And what was kind of several things happened, didn't they? That kind of second wave feminism changed everything, and a whole belief of, as women, we obviously can do all these things in the workplace that we've been told, because previous generations were told your head will explode, poor darling, your womb will travel around your body and you'll go mad.
The vapors.
Yes, you'll faint. You'll actually faint if you have to do thought and work. And I am sure that women would have said that at the time. They would have said, "Oh, I couldn't possibly. I'm too weak. Not my brain will overheat and I'll faint as soon as I try and do anything." And now we think, "Oh, that's ludicrous." But what we didn't kind of finish with second wave feminism was who takes care of people and how do we value that. And so if we believe that care is one of the most important things, the care of our young, the care of our old, the care of people who can't take care of themselves, then in capitalism, you have to show a financial value for that to say, yes, culturally, we really value that. And we haven't done that. And not having done that means that we're still all completely shackled and incapable of fulfilling our potential.
Yes. While you were talking too, I was remembering my godmother talking about my mum, who had a business in Norwich. She had a little boutique, a dress shop. And, I was the child. I wasn't a latchkey child, but I certainly was the only child in my class whose mum had a job. And and she juggled all sorts of things, and Auntie Margaret's like, "Well, your mother just wanted it all, you see." But I look back at that childhood, and I did go to other people's houses and go, what's your mum done all day then? Because my normal was so different from theirs. But I look at my life and how I've adapted financial situations that I had to get out. I just found myself a job. My mum always found herself a job so she could provide for us because she had to. But that was the 70s and 80s, and that was still a very odd thing. It was a very odd thing. And then she had a baby at 47. Accident.
Wow.
But she had the baby, and now she's like all the grandma's age, taking my 5-year-old sister to school when there weren't older mums in 1979, early 80s. She's had everything thrown at her. And when you have everything thrown at you, you find a way to survive. So just my personal story about my mom underscores exactly what you're saying. But I just have never thought of it in that way because I've never known of the science behind it. But again, who's keeping that science a secret from us?
Well, they're not. So
who's keeping it a secret? There's only one culprit, and it's got to be all of mankind.
Well, no, it's not. And I constantly say that patriarchy, you can be a misogynist and be a woman, and you can be a feminist and be a man. It's got nothing to do equally with your gender. There are plenty of women that are knowingly, or I would say unknowingly, but striving to kind of keep up that narrative of this is what women are like, this is what men are like, keep everybody in their boxes and, never allow the women predominantly to fulfill their potential, but facilitate the men in fulfilling their potential. I know plenty of mothers. So my kids are 16 and 14, and I live in quite a lowercase C conservative area, and lots of the mothers are making sure that their children are as gendered as is possible to be, and they are doing things like sending the boys to private school and not sending the girls to private school because that would be better for Johnny because Johnny's really into sport and they're really good at sport at private school. So there's lots of stories. They're not saying I'm sending him there because he's more valuable, because he's more likely to get a job and then he's got to support the wife.
She's not.
Yeah, she's not sporty. She'll be fine. And the comp really suits her. And that's much more, she can adapt and she can fit in with lots of different people, but, he's going to do much better. And that's despite all the evidence which shows that boys do badly in single sex schools while girls do well in single sex schools, that boys without girls don't do particularly well. And we know that they don't necessarily then grow up to be the best citizens. But none of that.
Mentioning no names.
None of that seems to matter.
Every prime minister since Dear Dot.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't, and I know plenty of men that are ardent feminists that completely get it and are campaigning to change everything.
Yes. So going forward, this is all well and good, Holly. I agree with everything you're saying. There's no dramatic conflict in this movie that we're writing so far. What the heck is the next 10 years? I mean, I do feel hopeful, with Patty Jenkins and Chloe Zhao. They're leading the field, but how is it going to change? Do we have to look at the men who hold the purse strings, or the do we have to start bringing them on side as well and breaking their preconceived ideas about female-led, female-told, female stories?
So I think the easiest thing to do, and it is happening, and I relish it, especially when it's happening in the tentpole movies, which it does. Marvel are making quite feminist movies, and they're making them with quite diverse casts, and everyone that they make steps up its game on all those levels. And you think, okay, well, if that's happening, those films are so influential and they influence us on so many levels. So if we can change the stories that we see on screen, then we can change culture, because those stories are what create us and create our imaginations. So I keep saying, if we said, for example, for the next 10 years, every time you show a surgeon or a judge on screen, there have to be a black woman. Then within 3 years, when I said the word surgeon to you, you would no longer picture what you probably picture, which is a white bloke, possibly an Asian bloke, but probably a bloke. You would picture a black woman. When I said judge, you wouldn't picture an old white bloke, you'd picture a black woman. And so those images are only there because they've sort of been handed to us by what we absorb. And every time you change a crowd scene and put 50% of women in a crowd scene, because predominantly they're not 50% women, and you happen to have somebody in a wheelchair, but the story isn't about them being in a wheelchair, or they happen to be Asian, but the fact that they're Asian isn't the story, or they happen to be trans, but the fact that they're trans is nothing to do with the story, or they're gay, but their sexuality isn't the story. It's just that they are people existing as we do in the community of a film. Then you change how people think about it.
What you're doing is not necessarily reflecting the world as it is now, but how it can be. And because films are so influential and so many of us watch them, we're seeing the future, so that when the future catches up, it's not an anomaly.
But I think it's also two-edged, because I think it is now. All those people are all of those things now. It's just they're not the image that's written into your mind, because the image that's been written. So, for example, we're talking about screening a First World War film and doing a big kind of event around it. And I was saying that the reason that when we think of the wars, we think of white men fighting wars, is because that's what's happened in our films. So although we know the black history of World War I and World War II especially, we don't have the imagery, because that's not what's been shown to us. Again and again, newsreels and films have shown white men fighting those wars. And so that's what we assume was the situation. And in the same way, we haven't been shown black female directors on screen. So when I say film director, I imagine that you will actually, even though you are one, but what you'll picture is a white bloke, a white American bloke, maybe shouting, maybe with a cap on backwards, but not a black woman.
No, he had a megaphone and jackboots and jodhpurs as well. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Whereas actually at that time, Lois Webber was the best paid film director. So in the 1920s, when D.W. Griffiths was making films and sitting on the big pole with a megaphone, she, just before him, was the best paid filmmaker in Hollywood and ran a studio and made loads of films. But we don't know her name or her films.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? It's just a fascinating conversation. I don't feel like we're going around in circles because we know what the situation is. The situation has been like this for way too long. And what's exciting to me in these conversations is that I'm talking to, recent university graduates and ladies like ourselves who've been, around around life and back again. And it's very exciting to hear what's going on. When is the Bath Festival? When do you have it? What are the dates so people can look and come and enjoy all the hard work that you're doing?
Yeah, so hopefully, so last year we had 2 festivals, but it being lockdown, the obvious thing was to have so we had one online festival, which we did in partnership with 3 other film festivals, and we had an in-life film festival, which was in what had been a previous train station, so we could all be socially distanced, and we basically built a cinema inside the train station. So I don't know where we're going to be this November, but our film festival is in November. And we also have the IMDb Awards. So we have we give £5,000 cash and £1,000 worth of hire kit to the best script to be made into a film. And we give £1,000 worth of cash and £1,000 worth of hire kit to the best short film for the money to be spent on the next film. And those run throughout the year. And the F rating runs until we have equality on screen and behind the camera.
Yes, won't it be nice to sort of put it away in a little vault, go, thank you for your time and your service, but we now have 50-50 everywhere.
Yeah.
I wonder if you and I will still be about to see that.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. And, in England and America, women are 51% of the population because boys don't survive so well. So actually, it should be 51%.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. 51% ownership gives us more voting rights and everything.
Yeah.
Holly, thank you so much. This has been really a brilliant conversation. And now that you're you're one of the daughters, one of Artemisia's daughters, we'll stay in touch with you. And please, share any of your social stuff with me, which I can put out there and promote the festival. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Fierce Female Filmmakers is a production of Artemisia's Daughters. For more information, go to artemisiasdaughters.org. Our theme tune is composed by Charlie Mackey.